Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be going over the Yugoslav Dragon, starting with the move pawn to e4, pawn to c5, knight f3, d6. We're going to have d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, bishop e3, and we're going to be going straight into the queen a5 variation of the Yugoslav Dragon. After castle's queenside, we're going to have queen to a5. So another move order that you can try here is you can try knight e5 first and then queen a5, and that's ostensibly the same thing. That was always my move order preference. Just force the bishop to go back and then play queen a5, but either move order is fine. Queen a5, we're going to have bishop to b3, and then the main idea here is rook fc8 with the idea of freeing up the f8 square for the king. So that the move knight d5 down the road is no longer a possibility because the e7 pawn won't be hanging in the same way that it was a move ago. So that would be after like knight e5, king b1, for example. So here we're going to have white play in a really straightforward fashion. We're going to have white play h4, and we're going to have knight e5. And today we're going to be exclusively looking at the line where white plays really straightforward. He doesn't waste time on king b1. He doesn't play the move pawn to g4, which I cover in another video. He's just going to play in a really straightforward fashion. He's going to play h5 and just kind of play for mate without wasting time with king b1 or wasting time with g4. So if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button, click on your notification icon. So here, the move that you have to play is you have to play this exchange sacrifice. No matter how you play from here, you have to play this. If you allow him to do this h4-h5 maneuver without sacrificing the exchange, you will get mated because eventually the knight will come to d5 and the game will be over when this knight gets exchanged. You cannot survive that attack as long as the knight on c3 is alive. The rook takes c3 exchange sacrifice is primarily a defensive exchange sacrifice to stop you from getting mated. It does have the added bonus of messing up the pawns around white's king and just messing up those pawns in general, and that will be helpful in an endgame. But for the most part, it's just to prevent that knight from going to d5, to get rid of that knight so that the knight on f6 can defend the king side basically forever and ever. So there's two options here. There's queen c3 and bc3. So the option that I'm least worried about, and the option that you don't have to have a ton of preparation on, is queen c3. And this is like really the most common option that I see. For some reason, people think that when they win an exchange, if they get queens off the board, that this somehow favors them even more. And the reality is that this solves all of black's opening problems completely. Because after we exchange queens, we basically don't need any preparation from this point going forward. We play knight takes h5, and we have compensation for the exchange. We have a pawn and we have a piece for the exchange, and then on top of that, white has some doubled pawns. So we'll have compensation for the exchange from here way into the endgame, no matter what happens. So like if, for example, g4, we would play knight f6, and now black's moves from here are very natural. We're going to continue with b5, a5, rook c8, etc., and just improve our position very naturally. Whereas white's how white improves is going to be very unnatural from here. He's going to have to find some unnatural way to improve his position. It's much more difficult to play white's position than it is to play black's. So here the position should be considered approximately level, but in my experience, I would even rank this position as possibly slight edge black. So instead of queen c3, the move bc3 is much more trying, because the move bc3 basically leaves open the possibility of white continuing to play for mate, and of course it leaves open the possibility of both sides continuing to play for an attack. And that's really what the dragon is all about, and that's what any position is all about when each side has castled on opposite wings. The material shouldn't really matter all that much. All that really matters is who gets there first. So here we're going to have the move knight takes h5. And now things get very, very interesting, because there's basically two moves here. There's g4 playing for mate this way, and what white is, of course, hoping for is that this knight retreats to f6, and then he continues very naturally with a move like bishop h6, etc. And then there's this move bishop h6. So the move bishop h6 is maybe a little bit better than g4. It's actually not clear because all of the positions in both lines are very unclear. But bishop h6 should be met with bishop takes h6, queen takes h6, and then actually the move queen captures c3 is a mistake. And it's a mistake according to the engine, and it's interesting because the move doesn't at first seem like it should be a problem. Like queen c3 looks like it creates some pretty serious threats, but there's apparently an issue with it within the lines, which is, white is not forced to play the move king b1 and prevent queen a1 to d4, which is the threat. White can instead play a move like knight e2, and this position is apparently supposed to be completely winning for white. So you're not supposed to play queen c3 here. You're supposed to kind of preempt the move queen c3 with knight f6. So now the move queen c3 is actually on the table, and it's actually a legitimate threat. So here, White has to preempt the move queen c3 with the move king b1, because now queen c3 followed by queen a1, queen d4 was on the table. So this, again, makes total sense. And now again, queen c3 doesn't quite work according to the engine, so instead what black should do is black should just ratchet up the pressure, black should just play rook c8, and then white should defend that pawn with knight to e2, and then white should play bishop to b5, and then white should, of course, move that knight. He should play knight to f4, and this creates a very dangerous situation because now this knight is threatening to come to d5, and if knight d5, queen h7 is, of course, completely winning for white. So we need to do something to defend this d5 square and prevent our knight on f6 from getting exchanged, otherwise the game is completely over. So obviously we still don't have time for queen c3. The move that we have to play is bishop to c4, and we have to hold that d5 square. So here, there's a couple possible moves for white, although white's position is already sort of difficult. But it's possible that white is actually better if he plays the move pawn to g4. But of course, this move is also not incredibly obvious, and after pawn to g4, it's also not incredibly obvious that black is doing significantly worse here. That position is probably just equal, or we'll just say unclear. So pawn to g4 is probably best here, but the other move that white could play, which makes a ton of sense, is to play something like knight h3, with the idea of ratcheting up pressure with the move knight to g4, but also as a way to clear the way for the queen to come back and try to start defending the queen side with queen to d2 down the road. So this variation leads to a queen exchange. So after, say, queen c3, we're going to have queen d2, we're going to exchange these queens, and then after h5, this position is simply slight edge to major advantage black. Black has two pawns for the exchange, black has the easier position to play, and black has the better pieces. All of black's pieces are beautifully placed. This position should be considered slight edge black. So if we go all the way back to this decision point here, where white could play either bishop to h6 or pawn to g4, we have to take a look at the alternative here. We have to take a look at g4. Now, after pawn to g4, this leads to some pretty wild complications after the move knight to g3, attacking the rook on h1. The natural move is to, of course, move the rook, or something like rook h3, but you might have noticed that when the knight goes to g3, we've kind of abandoned the protection of the h7 square. So it's also tempting to do something like sacrifice that rook on h1 and just go for h7, try something like queen h2. In this case, apparently black can get away with just taking the exchange, and then the idea is that we have all these threats, starting with queen c3, which will threaten both the bishop on e3, and also threaten the queen a1 to d4 windmill, because when you play queen a1, the king will come to d2, and then d4 could be hanging if the bishop is moved. Apparently, the winning move in this position is actually h6. With all of these ideas in mind. Basically the idea being that if they waste time to play bishop h6, that black's attack is apparently landing before white's attack is landing, and that black's attack should be winning under these conditions. And of course, it's a very complicated position, but that's apparently what's going on here, is h6 is the winning move, and this is supposed to be decisive advantage black after the move pawn to h6. So apparently the move queen h2 is kind of no-go. So the correct move is a move like rook to h3. And now the killer blow here is the move knight to f3, which in my experience will win about 90% of the time on the spot when they reply with knight takes f3. If they play queen to g2, the position is still supposed to be relatively unclear. So this leads to a long forced continuation that's just completely unclear. After knight takes e4, we're going to have something like queen f3, queen a3. This is all totally forced. King b1, knight c3. King a1, we have to defend f7, so rook f8, and then bishop a3, and then we just start having total insanity here. We have knight takes d1, sacrificing our queen on a3, but we get a bunch of stuff in exchange. So bishop f7, rook f7, that drops the queen, but we get the knight on d4. c3, the bishop would come back to g7, we would have queen to b3, bishop takes g4, attacking the rook, takes, and then we wouldn't capture back right away with king g2 because of rook h7, so we'd have to play h4. They couldn't save the bishop, they'd have to save their rook. Rook g3 takes, and then we have a rook and 4 pawns versus a queen, which it appears eventually leads to some type of fortress for black, like starting with rook f4, queen d2, g5, and then we would advance our queenside pawns, trade off one of white's remaining pawns, and then simply advance this other queenside pawn all the way to a3, get the rook to f3, and then once the king wheels around to, say, the g3 square, this position should be a complete fortress. But if you don't believe in this fortress or you don't believe in this line, which is totally understandable, there is this alternative. Like instead of the move knight takes f3, you could simply play the move knight takes e4, and then after f takes e4, you have bishop g4 here, rook g3. You can simply take this exchange and play rook c8. And this position is still supposed to be relatively unclear. But going back to this line with knight takes f3. But on the very natural knight f3, white should have a completely losing position after knight takes e4. The idea is that we're threatening the queen on d2, we're threatening the pawn on c3, and we're threatening to do absolutely everything with check. If we rewind, this is basically the idea when they play this early h4, h5 in the Dragon Sicilian and the queen a5 lines. We need to sacrifice on c3, and we need to follow up by taking on h5, and that's if they exchange queens, we need to take on h5, or if they don't exchange queens, we need to take on h5. We're meeting g4 with knight g3, and we're meeting bishop h6 with bishop takes h6. And basically that's how you play this line with the black pieces, and you should be okay in all variations. You should get either an unclear position, or in some cases, slight edge black or major advantage black if white makes some sort of mistake. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.